Hello, everyone, and welcome to Connect Spring. My name is Leana Salamah with the International Housewares Association, and this is our presentation on harvest, Halloween, and holiday. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Our speaker will be taking questions at the end of the session. Please go ahead and use the Q&A function down at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit questions at any time during the session, and I will gather them up and we will do a Q&A session following Michelle's presentation. Secondly, these sessions are being recorded and will be available on IHA's website within 2 weeks of the event's conclusion. So that would be roughly around mid-April. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Michelle Lamb is the co-founder and editorial director for The Trend Curve, and her full bio is available on our website at theinspiredhomeshow.com/connect. Thanks so much for being here, Michelle. Let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks. All right. In our year and a half of quarantine isolation so far, we've had plenty of time to think about the people we've been separated from and the traditions we once shared with them. To say that we now long for these touch points is an absolute understatement. Whether 2021 is the year during which we can return to our friends and families and rituals, or we're compelled to wait for 2022, there is no doubt that we're going to do so with a different frame of mind. We'll definitely feel uplifted. At the same time, many of us may approach these holidays with a more intentional mindset. We'll be soaking in every minute and taking very little for granted. In addition to this state of, let's call it acute presence, another consideration is going to impact our thinking. For more than a year, our focus has been turned primarily inward on ourselves. And in fact, this was the concept behind last year's mindful season trend. But it's also been turned inward on our home, which is variously transformed into our office, school, bakery, sanctuary, prison for some of us. If anyone saw inside our home, it was because we staged a table or a room and we posted it on Instagram. Just last month, Data Central asked consumers what they're most excited to do when restrictions ease. 56% said meeting family or friends at someone's house, or maybe at our house. So as we prepare to do just that, we recognize that guests are going to have more than a glimpse at our furnishings. After all these months of knowing that nobody could really see the layer of accumulating dust on the furniture and the countertops, guests are going to be up close and personal with our decor. That's certainly going to be top of mind as consumers decorate for the holidays, holidays that can be shared together once again. So who wouldn't take some extra care in how their home is decked out for harvest or Halloween or Christmas? For 2021 and 22, that attitude is translating into some sort of peacock behaviors. I'm not talking about peacock as a color or a pattern, but as a tendency to show off. Not a lot, just a little bit. In fact, I just read something about the apparel industry that said that apparel sales are coming back, still down about 11% this year, but they're coming back. And one of the things that is noticeable is a return to dresses and things that look a little bit dressier. So we can see that this is happening in parallel with apparel. So one of the things you'll notice today is an undercurrent throughout all the presentation in design elements that might sit right on the border of dressy. They're not opulent. Too many of us have seen a negative impact on our incomes during the pandemic for opulence to have any relevance. And not formal. When your dining room is also a desk and a study hall, even alluding to formality seems absurd. This look is just a little more stylish. It's a metaphor for our cautious optimism for the future. Another hallmark of seasonal decor in this recovery will be benign themes. For a second Halloween in a row, anything horrifying is just off the table. No blood, no gore, just sweetness and smiles. And finally, you'll note a tendency to embrace nostalgia. If it's part of a childhood memory or if it's from generations ago when times were simpler and safer, It will have a fourth quarter following. And that's why some of the trends that I presented last year, and if you were here last year, you might remember Mid-Mod Mary and Letters to Santa. These themes are going to stick around for another year. Ditto some motifs like nutcrackers. But I definitely have some fresh ones to share with you. So let's get started with our first trend, which is harvest homecoming. For centuries, autumn has been harvest time. And that's why we now equate fall with bounty. Yet being unable to share that bounty with friends and family left us with sort of a hollow feeling during the pandemic. With restrictions easing, our first harvest season is going to feel like an absolute reunion. For many people, this celebration will take on a more serious tone. Again, not formal, but well-planned and nicely appointed. Remember me mentioning just a minute ago, looks that sit on the border of dressy? Table settings and decor are going to be right there as a way of demonstrating how special this moment will be. Materials are going to lead the way for us. Glass, for example, has texture from etching or frost or pearl or mercury finishes, or it has a sophisticated pattern. Select pieces will feature metallic. Fabrics include linen, velvet, embroidered cottons, and jacquard wovens. Metals sport a little bit of luster. Wood is stained in rich colors, or maybe it has some laser etching, or it's coated with pattern-rich enamel. Ceramics will favor perfect glazes, and maybe a little metallic here too. Even MDF is getting a decorative makeover. Words matter. They express our emotions, and those emotions are overflowing with gratitude for health, for being together, and for once again having the opportunity to create shared experiences. We feel lucky to gather again. And of course, the word family is also important. And post-COVID, it's important to understand that there is a breadth to the definition of family that wasn't there before. Fonts tend to be both mixed and decorative, working like a pattern. Other surface designs include pumpkins and leaves, fall flowers, fruits, and tonal plaids. We love the plaids, which are growing almost everywhere throughout trend. Will we ever take friends and family for granted again? Probably. But in the near term, the positive emotions we have around reuniting with them are going to dominate our thinking, making Harvest Homecoming a winner for the next 2 years. Today, consumers feel a sense of both safety and freedom when they're outside. This feeling isn't going to magically vanish as we recover from the pandemic. And that's why our next trend, Fall Market, is all about being outside in autumn. Fall market is actually an evolution of the farmhouse trend. Of course, you can't have a market without a farm, but in the next iteration of this look, we're going to leave behind the pickup trucks and the hay bales to focus on environmental responsibility, eating organic foods and shopping local to increase our personal well-being. They're all connected now. All these things, which we have come to value even more over the past year, are embodied in Fall Market. Expressing authenticity is the goal, so everything feels as honest and true as the markets themselves, from pumpkins to produce to baskets for berries or apple picking and corn husk weaves. Wood and bamboo come in warm finishes. Glass is covered in simple pattern or a faux bois texture. That's that fake wood look that you're seeing expressed in the anti-glass. Metal is unadorned like wire, or maybe it's tin and it's painted with bountiful designs. While matte looks may appear as accents, ceramic tends toward glazes in this trend too. Leaves dominate in shape and motif. Dried flowers and berries are as important. Eucalyptus and cotton play accent roles. Words like pumpkin patch and apple orchard become a playground for serif fonts, but they're not the only words that matter. Anything at all that connects with the authenticity of the market and a mood that is at the same time celebratory and relaxing. all that is a fit. As a ground or all over, plaids are making perfect supporting patterns here. And they are supported by buffalo checks that linger on from the prior year. We've had a lot of buffalo checks in the last 2 years in particular. We'll have fewer of them, but they will still move forward into this trend. Consumers are definitely taking issues of environmental responsibility and well-being seriously. In this theme, those topics are expressed through warm palettes and sophisticated textures and understated motifs. The result is a comforting style that we believe will easily take us through 2022 and perhaps also through Harvest 2023. When I started thinking about our first Halloween trend, I couldn't help but concoct a little story in my mind. You know, trend really is all about storytelling. So in this trend, we're drawing parallels between the story of pandemic survivors and the story of occupants in the cemetery. Both groups have felt isolated for way too long. So no wonder they're craving company and conversation and connecting with friends. As October 31st approaches, you can imagine invitations being sent out in the cemetery for a Halloween gala. It's a party that nobody is going to turn down. Party prep starts days in advance when hosts tie on aprons and pour through recipe books. Mixing bowls come out along with spoons and spatulas and hot pads because it's time to bake. Decorating's done with what's at hand. Spider webs are plentiful, and so are pumpkins. So both of these things will end up on the buffet table along with some old candlesticks covered in flock. Like flock, most of the textures we see here are going to be matte. That means weathered concrete and stone looks, matte ceramic, uncoated paper, frost effects for glass and metal with small scale pressed patterns. The excitement rises as the clock strikes midnight and guests pass by the sentry. First stop, as always, it's the bar, and then food. Even though social distancing is a non-issue for this crowd, other social norms are still in play. For example, the meal has to be made up of individual serving eats like personal pan pizzas that are easy to hold on a disposable plate. Since nobody has to worry about eating sweets, everyone expects the dessert table to be packed with bite-sized treats. Macaroons are always popular, so are cupcakes and stamped cookies. Activated charcoal ice cream is newer this year. Caramel apples are another favorite, but marshmallow and pretzel skeletons are the hit of the evening, wrapped individually, of course. When guests are all talked out and the evening is done, everyone feels a bit lighter and a lot happier on the walk back to their coffin. It's been good to see old friends and to feel normal, even if it's just for one night. In our next trend, we recognize that if the pandemic has taught us one thing, it's that our memories can sustain us. So in this trend, we reach beyond our personal history and we're reaching back to our cellular memory. And in doing so, we connect with an era that our great-grandparents knew, or maybe it was the generation before them. Really, identifying the exact time frame isn't important. What is important is knowing that it was a simpler time and, at least in our minds, a fear and worry-free one. All the icons and motifs have a naive sensibility. When we see human figures, they're young children, and they have cherubic faces and rosy cheeks and wide eyes. Some of them hold toys that you might recognize from the era, and they wear costumes that just don't completely cover their street clothes. So again, we can confirm that retro era. Inanimate objects are personified with childlike appearances. That includes black cats and pumpkins, and especially ghosts. Vintage Halloween ghosts are never frightening. Instead, they have friendly expressions even when you know they're saying boo. Supporting motifs work as well today as they did yesterday. Bats, for example, appear in shape and pattern. So do witches' hats. Simple polka dots reinforce a lighthearted tone. Treat bags were smaller then, and most of them had candy corn inside. It's one of a number of this trend's retro treats that also includes homemade candies and carameled apples, plus fruit pies, shaped cakes, and decorated cookies. Words could have been lifted actually from candy hearts that kids have been eating since the early 1990s. Be mine, kiss me, cutie pie. Materials in this trend speak to time-worn textures. Paper then looks a little bit yellowed. Fonts have a vintage sensibility. Metals tend toward distressed tin. And ceramics will come with relief pattern or edges that look uneven or imperfect. Woven grasses stay to basic basket weaves. But again, the colors look decades old. The perception that they have faded to a mid-tone value reinforces this theme's vintage credentials. The notion of connecting with this simpler time, the same idea behind a cottagecore trend that I'll talk more about for Christmas, that's going to be very comforting to pandemic-weary consumers. That's why we like vintage Halloween through 2022. Now let's shift over to Christmas. Anyone today who attended my prior seasonal webinars might remember that I emphasized the rise of green for Christmas in 2019 and 2020. The biggest winner in this family was actually a mid-tone called eucalyptus. That color has now been fully embraced. So we fast forward 1 year and the market is ready for the next evolution of this color story. In this scenario, eucalyptus is still there. It anchors a short palette that includes somewhat darker sage, saturated teal, and peacock. Though all of these colors are members of the green family and every one of them taken alone could be described as cool, each one has a different character. And the fact that these hues sit right on the edge of blue makes them really usable. Cool Christmas is definitely rooted in nature, and that's where we see not only these cool shades of greens, but of course we'll also see a few warm types too. But for 2021 and 22, it's the blue influenced greens that will really step out, offering a frosty commentary on the holidays with an alternative to predictable blue that is nonetheless reminiscent of it. 3 distinct values are going to play a part here. Midtones are the lightest. They're slightly complex. They feel familiar. They're easy to live with. Teals are more saturated. Now, teals, as you know, are perpetually popular. They're a classic choice, but typically they're over on the list for core products. Now we're going to move it into trend when it's shown in this theme. Cool Christmas enhances the already strong potential for teal. For drama now, our 3rd color value, we're going to go even further to the dark side, and this is where evergreen lives. Now, this isn't a new color. In fact, evergreen's been building for probably 2 years, and it's still valid as part of an Art Deco theme with a tight group of companion colors. The black and the gold metallic are here. But now evergreen is ready for a solo role in a monocolor approach for the holidays that will certainly be on trend. That said, using these multiple cool greens together creates a close harmony that's fresh and really compelling. There's real power in a monochromatic approach to the holidays that comes from the the green side instead of blue. We love these greens in solid colored applications for trends, lots of solids together. But they will also be quite effective in surface designs. You'll see them used both ways in 2022 and beyond. This winter, Ski resorts have had to rewrite the rules of the slopes to accommodate mask mandates and social distance lift lines and limited lodge use. Nonetheless, according to NPR, more people than ever are hitting the slopes on skis and snowboards. So no wonder a ski theme is popping up for the holidays. But it's not just a love of being on the snowy slopes that's the engine behind this trend. It's also that feeling of well-being that people now get when they're out in the open, where the air can move around without artificial circulation. Alpine Chalet turns its attention to the mountains of Europe and Scandinavia, where the elite have played in the winter for decades. A retro sensibility speaks to a carefree time when being outdoors was really all about fun and not safety. What I love about this is the chic couture that's part of this, maybe from the 40s. This is on show, so figures aren't dressed in today's high-tech cold weather gear, but in stylish wool clothing that was worn decades ago. Ski scenes are front and center, along with skis themselves. They're joined by lift tickets and ski boots and gear for other cold weather fun, like maybe skates and sleds. Since snow is at the center of this trend, snowflakes get lots of visibility, and this will be true in both shape and in pattern. Look for multiple takes on crystal formations, since no two snowflakes are the same. Trees are stylized. They might use scallops or triangles, or they might be outlined with cozy materials like faux fur. Other fabrics, knits, fleece, velvet. But something about these fabrics and ceramics and the wood gives the impression that these items were saved from, maybe 50, 60, 80 years ago. Along with mountains, ski figures, and Nordic sweater looks, surface designs recall the early mid-century with dot and star repeats. The look of vintage posters is another factor that inspires us to fun and relaxation. I think this trend ticks so many boxes. It speaks to our desire to trust the air we breathe and to breathe it in deeply, to relax through both recreation and feeling cozy, and to connect with the simpler time when nobody had even heard of coronavirus. We give this trend high marks for the next 2 years. Coastal looks have been around for so long that they are no longer even considered a trend. Having said that, the palettes in which they are expressed are definitely trend-worthy. Over the past decade, coastal color stories have shifted from azure and turquoise to coral and aqua, to amethyst and eucalyptus, and even on to all white. The newest palette borders on inky. But it doesn't give off a gloomy vibe. Instead, it suggests precious sea life hidden at the bottom of the sea, protected from every external force. This part of the ocean will survive and thrive no matter what is going on above the water. Though the range of blues goes as dark as nautical navy, it also includes intense cobalt and variations on teal. Teal becomes a pivot point to emerald, which will be an accent. We'll also see shades of aubergine, also in accent roles. Now, it may seem surprising that such a dramatic and dark palette can also be reflective, but it certainly is. That tendency comes not only from metallic accents, but also from iridescent and pearl finishes, from sequins, gemstones, glazed ceramic, and glass. Contrast comes from textured finishes, frosted glass, flock, and velvet. Normally, they're coastal bestsellers, but in this case, mermaids are moving into supporting roles. What's up front? Turtles. They have much more sway. Maybe that's because nearly all sea turtle species are endangered, and this is according to World Wildlife Fund. With consumers paying even more attention to issues of mass extinction since the pandemic began, giving these underwater slowpokes top billing elevates their plight. When it comes to pattern, to surface design, turtles will be joined by seahorses, octopi, jellyfish, really fish of all kinds, coral, and many, many shells. Midnight Under the Sea takes a casual theme that's both familiar and popular for the holidays, and it gives it a new twist. Embracing a dark and dramatic palette suggests luxury, but it does so in a way that alludes to being cocooned and protected. The result is a feeling of safety that will continue to be important into the foreseeable future. Elves in the Kitchen is inspired by all the pandemic baking that's been done since lockdowns began in 2020. But rather than focusing on loaves of bread all the time, we're going to look to the special treats and baked goods that we remember from childhood holidays. This is nostalgic. The string that connects the present with the past is really important. Touching on the deepening interest in nostalgia, nostalgic characters, nostalgic motifs. Last year, we talked about the return of poinsettias and cardinals and nutcrackers. For 2021 and 2022, expect elves to join in. In fact, we are forecasting more elves in the coming 2 years than we have seen in many decades. These elves will relate even more to the past because of the color story in which this theme is expressed, red and green. For the past few years, this duo has been terrific if you are looking at a core theme, but trend has kept far away from it. They've used one or the other until now. That's because of COVID. Now that comfort and familiarity have moved to the top of pandemic-weary consumers' must-have lists, this basic combination is getting a twirl on the trend dance floor, at least when it comes to elves. So one way to make this duo feel more modern is to lean really heavily on white, so red and white. Another option is variations on green like lime. We like lime in particular in this theme. And then keep the patterns simple. Stripes and swirls, dots and pennant-shaped edging. Sprinkle in snowflakes and retro string lights and shoes with upturned toes. The stage is set with favorite recipes that have been saved for years. We like them printed on boards for newness. Elves will wear an apron or a chef's jacket, and they swap out their pointed hats for a toque. Towels and pot holders are always close by. Spatulas, measuring spoons, rolling pins, whisks, and bowls are tools of the craft. Ditto picks and papers. Cookie cutters come in endless fun shapes, but the old-fashioned ones like Christmas trees and Santa are always the most popular. Since we know that test batches are always sampled with a glass of milk or a cup of hot cocoa, we'll use those icons as well. What could be more comforting than the memory of fresh baked treats from the oven? And what could be more joyful than the smiling faces of elves remembered from childhood? These sentiments will propel Elves in the Kitchen, we think, into 2023. Have you heard about the cottagecore trend? It's really out there. Cottagecore celebrates a return to simpler times. It embraces harmony with nature, purity of outdoors, emphasizing escapism from the modern world in favor of being in the comfort of home. I think that's what we've all done for the last year. And it's trending. On the day that I checked Instagram, there are over 1,500,000 posts with the cottagecore tag. Try the tag Cottagecore Christmas and the results are going to be fewer, but we think that's just for now. We see real potential for cottagecore as a holiday theme starting in 2021 and moving through 2023. The look is decidedly romantic, bordering on pastoral fantasy. And it's nostalgic. There are vintage references that make this the closest thing we have seen to the 1980s country looks, well, since the 1980s. Baking is an important part of the story. So vintage look mixing bowls and cookie sheets, cookies, cutters that also translate into decor are present. Here, rolling pins have feature status. I love these rolling pins from Bloomingville. Poinsettias and especially flowers appear in pattern and form. Roses are going to stand out, but they're not alone. Look for dried flowers of all types. In print and pattern, the scale of these flowers is smaller, so pattern always looks more packed. This will be true for flowers. It's also true for fruit motifs, especially apples and pears. Those are the two standouts we see. Dried citrus will be used as a decoration. Berries get noticed, often in the company of greenery, including eucalyptus, which is trending. Tree leaves will also be there, and they'll have feature roles, as they often do. Materials reinforce the nature-based elements of this theme with wood that is oiled rather than stained. Stone with decorative veining, lots of movement here in marble or whatever whatever stone you use. Plain glass, natural fibers. Relief, ceramics, and tin. Cottagecore is for every consumer that values a front porch lifestyle. How many of those consumers are there? And how many of them will be looking to express this style for the holidays? We think the answer to both those questions is plenty. Get ready. This number of consumers is only growing. Cottagecore Christmas is going to be a big, big deal going forward. Okay, this one is called Supernatural. The pandemic has really supercharged the consumer's interest in and commitment to the earth. While this isn't limited to a certain generation, it's certainly more likely that the younger an adult happens to be, the more passionate they are in pursuit of this cause. We've already seen this expressed for harvest in fall market, and now we're going to see more of how it applies to Christmas. 3 factors are trend leaders. It's earthy colors, organic textures, and natural materials. Recently, anything about nature has had stone dominating the look. It's going to remain. We'll have some modifications like metallic details that are actually coming from the tile industry. We think this looks great. And pairing stone and wood. Yet going forward, it is the wood itself that's going to lead the way. Why is that? Well, whether motivated by the increasing incidence of wildfires or the runaway cost of lumber in home renovations and new home builds, trees and wood have become precious in a completely new way. So whether that wood is teamed with stone, covered in laser pattern, painted, flocked, it mimics birch bark, whatever way you see it, plan for wood or its look to be front and center here. Dried leaves, berries, flowers, grit, pods, they're extending the palette into a range of browns. There are plenty of browns here, and don't worry about browns being objectionable to consumers. We're in our 3rd year of browns building. They're firmly in the trend column, so go ahead and use them here. But we'll also see some dark reds, some ambers, and some gold tones. Woven grasses, we'll see a surge here too, but different from the past will be a focus on delicate cane looks that have updated everyday decor for maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and now they're familiar enough to make that shift over to holiday. This is going to be true for both the very small weaves and things that look like a large-scale cane repeat. On the other end of the spectrum will be full and wide wovens that could pass for sweater knits. The recent rise in natural wovens is really unsurpassed since the 1970s. And for that reason, we'll also see surface designs that mimic these weaves. This one is from Zara Home. Cotton, natural cotton, has been off the trend radar for about 3 years, and now we're seeing early signs of a reemergence here in accent rolls. We like this cotton. We think it makes a perfect companion to pine cones. And by the way, watch for liberties to be taken with pine cones. Take a look at this gnome's hat and you'll see what I mean. And by the way, I haven't touched on gnomes yet, but I have to tell you, they will appear in this trend and they will appear in other trends as they work their way into various holiday assortments. Accompanying them, mushrooms. So I think we're back to the 70s again, right? That's 1970s. But notice the sprinkling of glitter on the mushroom caps, and you'll see something that sets this take on eco-sensibilities apart from those of the past. It's a little suggestion of luxe that is behind the name supernatural for this trend. Still, it's just a hint, a brief interruption on a matte surface that can also be found on materials like feathers. We'll really see a lot of types of feathers here. Leaves, paper, it can also be found on glass as a pattern, as a simple band, either way. And it's interesting to see how good metallic touched glassware looks with textured and reactive glazed ceramics that we also find in Supernatural. I love how flatware can participate in here. It's another metallic opportunity. Matte metallic offers sophisticated contrast with the highly textured linen and cotton blends that are signaturing the textiles in this trend. Another touch of luxe, you hardly notice it, but it comes from fur, as well as flock. And by the way, if you haven't heard it yet, flock isn't being called flock anymore. It's actually being called velvet. Animals are always a feature in eco trends. In Supernatural, they come with glitter or metallic or micro beads, fur, and myriad decorative feathers, or some other elevated detail that makes Supernatural a natural fit for consumers going forward. So there are the trends I wanted to tell you about today, but excuse me, I do have 3 more that are just on my radar, so I wanted to put them on your radar too. Last year, we introduced the concept of neon colors for the holidays. We like them even more as we enter the post-COVID era. Don't forget to include these colors, which I think are just relentlessly optimistic, in at least a slice of your assortment. This isn't the dominant color palette. You want that, take those mid-tone mineral colors. But for a slice of your assortment, go for neons. Americans are missing travel right now. A late 2020 study from Hilton says 188 million of us are ready to hit the road again. 188 million, I'm one of them. An astonishing 53% say travel memories are more important than their smartphone. Wow. 66% of respondents will make travel a priority once restrictions are lifted. Travel is interesting and it's educational, but at this moment in time, it just represents an escape. And who among us isn't ready for that? As the holidays approach, consumers will be thinking about packing their bags when it's time to trim the tree. And of course, for those who can't actually travel yet, we're going to rely on fragrances and spices in the kitchen to transport us to faraway places. Pets, especially dogs and cats, are trending in seasonal decor. For many consumers, they were already valued members of the family and they deserved a role for the holidays. During the pandemic, pets have become even more important. These furry companions have helped many of us to deflect loneliness, and they've been a source of love and affection that's been particularly vital when being with friends and family has carried so much risk. Shelters and rescue agencies can attest to the connection between the pandemic and pet ownership. I saw the Petco CEO interviewed on CNBC's Squawk on the Street, and he said that there were 3 million plus incremental pets in 2020. So the love affair that many of us do have and have had with our dog or cat now applies to a new audience as well. And this will be an annuity for pet-themed merchandise. Pet references are rolling out right now in lots of seasonal collections. They're accompanied by dog bones, paw prints, dog houses, feeding dishes, or a clever play on words phrase like Feliz Navidad. I thought that was cute. Fido and Kitty can get dressed up in holiday bandanas or Halloween costumes, and they have their own Christmas stockings. There are more choices for pet participation during the holidays than ever before. So this is our forecast that we think pets will be a part of the holiday landscape for fourth quarter, at least for 2 years, probably 3, and maybe even more. Well, there we are. Those are the trends that I wanted to tell you about today. And here is a lot of places where you can connect with me if you'd like to. And now I'd like to turn it back to our hosts and see if we have any questions.
Michelle, thank you so much. Really, really wonderful stuff, as always. We do have a few questions that I will go through here. Folks can still go ahead and submit. But, and I usually like to kind of take these questions and go back, from the beginning of the presentation. So with regard to autumn harvest, when do you think that autumn harvest should start being shown at retail? Do you think that the demand will start earlier than in previous years? Same question about Halloween.
The answer will be yes for both of them.
Okay.
There is pent-up demand. I don't know how many of the people here today have been following the economists and what they're saying about the savings rate in the United States, which has been far elevated. They're talking about pent-up demand, not from stimulus checks, but from savings that they already have in the bank. Consumers are ready to roll. We need to give them a reason to do that. So when they have this feeling of longing about harvest and Halloween and Christmas, let's get those assortments out there and let them start to think about it, let them start to buy it, and let them start to feel that sense of optimism that these holidays will be different from the holidays of 2020.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A note here that a person noticed that your autumn harvest this must be someone who's seen your presentations in the past, has a lot more functional and usable entertaining items than in previous years versus decorative objects. Is that deliberate or is that a coincidence?
I think it's not an either or, it's a yes and. And of course, with this audience, I made a conscious effort to include housewares items, but they've always been there. Yeah. Even if you didn't see them, they've always been there.
Okay. So moving into the Christmas conversation, any trends in pattern or material related to gift wrapping that people should keep in mind?
Oh, how fun. Well, I mentioned, I don't know why the first thing that springs into my mind is eucalyptus. If we're doing naturals, and there'll be a lot to be said for those natural grasses and dried berries and those kinds of things, but eucalyptus, among all of those, eucalyptus is trending. So I'd like to recommend a little bit more than that, more of that.
How are you seeing gloss? 50-50 ratio to frost?
Do we have any clue as to what the material is here?
Not on this one, just how are you seeing gloss?
Because when I think frost, I think metal and I think glass. Okay. I don't think ceramic. Well, let me just say that so much will depend on the trend, but if we're talking about gloss as a metaphor for things getting shiny and dressing up, my answer is there's almost nowhere where you shouldn't have it, but don't let it overpower. The idea here is we are a little bit dressy. We're not over the top. Even if you work with a theme that is classic, more classic than anything I've shown here, don't go over the top. Matte really identifies a connection with sustainability and eco-responsibility and those kinds of things. The luster, regardless of where you get it, says, people are coming back to my house. I'm feeling more optimistic.
Joy, yeah.
So we're going to share a little bit of gloss.
Okay. Couple questions related to elves and gnomes. So let's start with elves. You had mentioned when talking about Halloween and ghosts that there was a particular kind of expression or sentiment, around the ghosts. How do you see that playing out in the elves trend? Some elves, they look, they may be interpreted as creepy versus, joyful. Are there any trends in their faces and their expressions that you would pay attention to?
What a great question. Those elves better look nice. No creepy elves, thank you very much.
I would agree. And then moving into gnomes. So we've been seeing gnomes for the past few years and for a lot of different seasons. Do you think they is that trend about to mature and go into the downward part of the trend, or do you think it's still on the rise?
I have actually seen more gnomes in collections for 2021 than I have seen so far. I happen to think elves have more juice for us, and but that doesn't eliminate gnomes. You better have one.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm not sure I would do a gnome theme on its own. I would integrate them into something else, and typically something more natural. There's been something going on during the last year as we've all hunkered down during the pandemic, and that is that consumers have said in increasing numbers for years that they are spiritual rather than religious. So I'm just quoting studies here with no opinion in the matter. In fact, if you asked me my personal opinion about gnomes, we'd have quite a conversation. But with that spirituality out there and growing and deepening during the pandemic, gnomes, fairies, definitely fairies, are rising. Angels, because we have lost so many people during the pandemic. So, and I don't mean to put angels and fairies and gnomes all together in any way, except that each one will be a representation of how some consumers choose to deal with the last year.
What is the best way to show seasonal if I want to make a more eco-responsible statement? Any particular materials that are really green that you would recommend?
Natural grasses, real wood. And that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I know that's a tough one because you don't always want real wood where you are, but the question was asked and here it is. I don't know if the person asking is a large scale company, representing a large scale company or a small one. The smaller you are, the easier it is to do everything natural. If you think about what's been going on with Etsy, if you search for terms like sustainable and that kind of thing with Etsy, you see things that really have the mark of the maker as part of their appearance, and anything that can achieve that mark of the maker, even better if you can do it with natural materials, that's the way to go.
We've got one more question just popped in. Do you see housewares gifting as playing a big role this season?
Oh, yes, what a great question. Yes, for a number of reasons. One is we'll be taking gifts again, not just because we're visiting someone in their home, but also because so many people are moving house. And there are a lot of reasons to give gifts. Put that together with the fact that we've been doing our pandemic baking, we've been trying out new recipes, we've been in our kitchens, as evidenced by the increase in sales in housewares product categories. So yes, I think gifting, absolutely. And we're not done with home bar either. Don't forget that one.
That's great. Okay, well, that does wrap up our questions. Michelle, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Really appreciate having you here. And for everyone on the call here, thanks for your participation, and we hope to see you in some additional Connect Spring sessions yet this week. Take care,
Thanks
everyone.
so much. Bye-bye.